Welcome to Mindful Men Talk. I'm James.
I'm Steve. We're two men talking
to get men talking. Why are men so reluctant to talk about their mental health, Steve? That is the title of today's episode.
Yes, indeed it is. How's your week been?
My week? Well, I celebrated my birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
I won't sing it. I'm not going to sing
Thank
it.
God for that. So I'm another year wiser. And I've been away, went to Norfolk.
Nice. Lovely, Norfolk.
Yeah, it was all right. It wasn't really what I expected. I've been to Norfolk before, but when we went this time, it just didn't, you know, when you go away and it just doesn't, I don't know what the word is, but it just doesn't click. You sort of, a few things get on your nerves, or, you know, it wasn't what you thought it would be. It was a bit like that.
You're becoming a grumpy old man, aren't you?
I think that's what it is. It could be age.
Yeah.
But we stayed in nature. You know, I consider myself quite connected to nature, Steve. In many ways, I like to be outdoors. And I've got no problem with beetles, but there's a time and a place for beetles, Steve. And the time is not when I'm trying to sleep, and the place is not in my pillow. And I just felt...
Oh, you're painting such a great picture of the ideal holiday.
I haven't even got onto that. The weather was rubbish and it was raining. And so, listen, it was a nice change of scenery. And I'm grateful that we got to go away somewhere, because not everyone has or will. But I'm just going to be honest, it wasn't great.
Okay.
It was one of those ones.
So, okay, when you say it wasn't great, what did you do about it?
Well, we went home a day early.
Did you?
No, we did.
James, that's shameful, isn't it?
Oh, terrible.
How could you do that? Did you pay for this holiday?
You're winding me up. I know where you're going with this one. Well, look, we tried to make the most of it. As I say, we were grateful that we were away, but we just allowed ourselves to leave early. I mean, we felt that, you know, we could have stayed and sat in a yurt with it raining outside and just, you know, allowed the beetles to overcome the situation. But we just felt we're going to sleep on it. At the end of the day, if we wake up tomorrow and we're not feeling it, we're going to go home. And that's what we did. And actually, I'm glad we did that, because it would have been so easy to be like, oh no, we've paid for this. This is our break, maybe our one break this year, and we've got to stay and we've got to... And I get that to a degree. You know, it's nice to try and make the most of things, and, as I say, be grateful. And I think that's important, because, you know, by no means did we suffer. You know, we're talking about a holiday, a little break that just wasn't what we expected. But still, it was okay to say that it wasn't what we thought it was going to be, and actually just go home.
Yeah, and I think I was teasing you, obviously, but in the sense that it's really interesting, isn't it, sometimes how we then feel like, well, we have to kind of, grit our teeth and bear it for no other. If we're having a miserable time, it's the kind of, again, what's a wise choice for me? Actually, let's just cut our losses and go. We're not enjoying it. Actually, let's go. But it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's those moments sometimes the should word comes up.
Oh, definitely. We had that conversation. We've paid. We should stay.
I know.
We should make the most of it more. We should make it work. But actually, you're just fighting against. It's like you're fighting a losing battle almost. You don't need to go to war with it anyway. You can just accept that it's not what you thought it was going to be, and actually go home, make the most of the time you got off in another way.
And interestingly, I know my experience of that is when you kind of procrastinate about this, because you're in this kind of internal tussle about, I should, but I don't want. But I often notice, I don't know how it was for you, just without getting too deep into this, but I know when I made the decision, I know it's right, because you get a feeling in your body where it's just like, this is right. It's time to go.
Yeah,
whatever it's just
sometimes
that thing.
Sometimes it's just a look, isn't it?
yeah.
Pack your bags.
Yeah, but you just know your body. This was. I don't need to. You don't think twice about it. I mean, no. But there's always next year.
There's always next year.
Always next year.
Who knows? Who knows about next year? Go on.
I know. Oh gosh, yeah, exactly.
And aside from that, it's been good. I've been doing a bit of running. Feeling tired, like my legs, Steve. I don't know if it's related to the fact that I've just had a birthday, but I'm not getting any younger.
Oh, don't talk to me about age.
I shouldn't complain. This is what I mean. So a bit like we said before, and I won't keep going into that, but just a little reminder. Sometimes it's, I think, needed that. Again, it's all about expectation, really. I guess what I'm finding I'm talking about now, expectation of going away, what it was going to be like, the run, the fact that I was tired, couldn't go as quick as I wanted to, but accepted that was the situation, how it was, and that if I just put one foot in front of the other, keep going, get a little run in, and I will feel better for doing something. And lo and behold, that's what happened.
Yeah.
So same theme always. How's your week been, Steve?
So update on the chickens. So we did break the being broody, so that was good. That was a bit interesting. And when I said in the last couple of episodes, life's been happening, la 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 la, and it's, if you're not careful, it's that kind of thing again that we kind of talk about in these podcasts, how we can just sort of, I'm fine and all that stuff. In truth, I've had a tough week, actually.
Well, I know you've had a stressful week.
Yeah, I've had a really tough week, we've had a tough week. Since family illness out of the blue, and, on everything that brings with it, it's been stressful. These things, I was thinking,
draining, isn't it?
It's draining, it is, because, they are curveballs. You got your everyday life, and then suddenly something like this happens, and it brings up all kinds of things.
So I guess the question that sprung to mind there is, what has helped you, or what's helping you deal with this stuff that you're having to deal with this week?
Well, first of all, talking to people about it, actually, for us to start, even talking about it right now is helpful, just to be able to air that I've had struggles, but just supporting myself, taking the pauses when I know that I'm getting I know on my way to get busy when I'm feeling stressed, or I don't want to think about it, or so just taking those pauses that I've learned through all my mindfulness practice, really helpful. And trying to look after myself as much as I can. And actually, interestingly, I really noticed last week I went to one of your group classes, Graft.
I thought I saw you in the photo, the group photo.
But and I made the effort, and I could have just said, I just don't feel like this, but I got that. And do you know what? It really shows again how often, you forget how good physical activity, being in the open air, a lot of things you talk about, James, and I really noticed it. It's a lovely location where you hold your classes. And I really gave me that, taking in the deep breaths, and just, obviously the class was always hard, but it was really helpful in terms of my mental health and supporting me through this really stressful time. So a number of things, but just like everybody else, it's just trying to surf the waves. I'm no different to anyone else.
Well, credit to you for going as well to that class, because it would have really been easy just probably to, not go, stay in bed, and then, you probably you certainly wouldn't have felt better for that in that moment, I'm sure. And then you'd have gone to work, and that could have changed. That decision would have, and has no doubt, had an impact on your day.
Totally. It really, really did. And I'm actually trying to drink some more water, funnily enough. Actually, that's been really helping consciously in the morning. First thing, I'm just trying to get into the habit of drinking more water, because I just find that all these little things that might just support me when, you see your body, particularly mentally, you're under some strain, it just, everything you can do just to support.
Yeah, I agree with that. And sometimes, I often talk to people about these things that they can do, drinking water, obviously exercising, trying to get a better night's sleep. But it's easy for those things to slip away sometimes. So it's almost like you just need a little reminder, or to remind yourself of the things that you find helpful. And it can be as simple as just filling up your glass and drinking a bit more water. Most people probably know that drinking water is a good idea. But I just think sometimes with everything going on in life just full on, you just can easily slip in and out of habits. And it's just good to come back to that, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, well, I'm going to repeat today's title, just in case you forgot, because that's all. We had a little catch up there. It was quite nice. Why are men so reluctant to talk about their mental health? Where do we start with this one, Steve? How do we unpack this one? Well,
I really wanted to talk about this because it feels, in the first couple of episodes, we've sort of set the scene really with our new focus, particularly on men. But I've really found myself wanting to go and sort of find out some research, a bit of wider discussion around, why don't we do it? Why don't we do it? And one of the things that, before we kind of get into it a little bit more, one of the things that really frustrates me is that something that I read, and I can't remember where it was now, this isn't the research that we're going to refer to in a moment, but is that men want to be heard. And so it kind of begs the question, so then why then don't they talk? It's that kind of, it kind of feeds in. It's like, and that's a really important thing. I think men want to be heard. So there's a gap, so it's interesting to me then to say, okay, what are some of the reasons? So that was for me the motivation to say, okay, let's just dig in and let's see if there's any research out there which kind of tells us, gives us a bit more of more specific insight into some of the reasons why men don't want to talk about their mental health.
Absolutely. And just as you said that men want to be heard, it's funny because I was making a few notes and I didn't know you were going to say that, but I actually wrote down that I believe everyone wants to be heard, but so many don't feel like they can find someone who will listen. And maybe that's one of the points we'll talk about later, I'm sure, but it's on there. People don't feel like they're being listened to, and we spoke about that a little bit last time. But yeah, I totally agree, and it would be great with what you were saying in terms of trying to unpack it and learn about maybe, let's get to the meat of it. Really, why are men so reluctant? Because we've spoken a bit before about what you can do to help your mental health, but I feel like this is almost, taking a step back and looking at it, thinking, well, let's be realistic here. We're way off of that still. Surely we're way off of men even beginning to do some of these things that we could suggest. So let's take a step back and look at what is stopping that even happening, getting to that point. What's the barrier here, or what are the barriers? Yeah,
put them on the table. And even before we kind of get into the meat of the discussion, I think it's just worth pausing. As I was looking and doing some research around this episode today, I came across some of the statistics around men and just their problems with mental health, and it is shocking. I mean, some of it we know, and we maybe throw them around quite freely in terms of statistics around suicide, but I'll just going to throw a couple out just as a scene setter, if that's okay.
Go for it.
So the first one is that in England, talking about England now, 1 in 8 men has a common mental health problem, e.g. depression, anxiety, panic disorder, OCD. 1 in 8. This information actually has come from the Mental Health Foundation UK. So that's pretty staggering. It's so it's, again, this is not a trivial issue we're talking about here. Men's mental health is a big issue. And the other stat that always gets me is that 3 times as many men as women are die by suicide, and that men aged 40 to 49 have the highest suicide rates in the UK.
It's big stats, yeah. And if you think about that in volume, it's scary, isn't it?
It's scary, but I think, again, it just makes me more frustrated saying we know. So why then why won't we talk about our mental health when we know we want to be heard? We're desperate to be heard, but there's reasons. What are those reasons? And that's what I wanted to find out and talk about today.
That sounds good. I can think already of many reasons. Well, from my experience anyway, and I'm sure you have some information to hand and you can talk from your experience as well on some of the reasons why we don't talk as much as we could and should.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I came across, James, was a survey that was done back in, it's a few years ago now, I think it's 2015, but I think it's still relevant, from the Priory Group, which is a group of hospitals and rehab centres in the UK.
That's right, yeah, they're independent, aren't they? They provide a range of mental health and addictions treatment around the UK. Yeah,
and they did a survey asking men about their mental health. Questions such as, what are the main causes of pressure? What areas of your life does your mental health impact on? And a whole section around asking them about, why they don't talk about their mental health. What are the reasons?
So 40% of men won't talk about their own mental health, according to Priory Group.
Yes.
Which is huge.
Full stop. Yeah, absolutely. And some of the reasons that they gave in answering the survey, I just want to go through some of them. How does that sound?
Go for it.
Yeah.
I'm ready when you are.
Well, the first one is a biggie. I mean, some of these we've touched on before, but it's a good idea to let's revisit them. Right, the first one is, I've learnt to deal with it. I've learned to deal with it.
What does that even mean?
Well, what does it, when you hear that, what does it mean to you when you hear that?
if I said that to someone, I think what I'm really saying is, I don't want to deal with it.
Yes.
It's funny.
Yeah.
I don't want to deal with it.
Or I'm too scared to deal with it, maybe.
Or I can't. I feel like I can't deal with it.
Yeah. And that is in itself is shocking.
It is shocking and actually fascinating at the same time, because it's the opposite of what you've just said. You know,
yes.
You said you've dealt with it, but actually it's the complete opposite.
Yeah. Well,
which makes it really hard actually for people then to have conversation, to talk about some of the things we've discussed before. Because if someone's saying, I'm fine, yeah, I've dealt with it, it's sorted, I'm done, the other person could easily be like, all right, well, okay, nice one. You know, that's all right then. But it clearly isn't like that, because the stats don't suggest, well, the stats suggest otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I hear that, and I've written against it when I was looking through this, what I hear when someone says that is, it's okay, I've got a lid on it.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not really dealing with it, but I'm just about keeping everything, I'm functioning. So whatever's there, I've found a way of not going there.
Yeah, and that's the thing, you're just keeping a lid on it. You might think that you're functioning, you're dealing with it, but actually your interpretation and belief around dealing with it is arguably not a great way to deal with it. And there are other ways you can do that, such as talking, some of the things we've spoken about before. But it's interesting, the narrative and the perspective that someone might have on how they have dealt with something.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that when you open it up a little bit more, there's something for me around, there's two ways of maybe thinking around mental health and any mental health problems. And I think particularly true of men is that normally when it comes to mental health and any sort of mental health difficulties, men are what we might describe as they're in this mode of, and their intention is to protect.
Yes. Steve, have you been reading my notes or something?
To protect themselves from feeling these things.
Can I just say, I wrote down, we might get onto this later, something about upbringing, how parents could maybe, I wrote, would be helpful for them to maybe share their stories with their children rather than feel like they shouldn't do that. Actually, that might help more. We can get to that. But I also wrote how men are seen as a fixer and a provider and protector, and women are seen as a carer, that role and how that can play out as well.
The intention is to protect themselves from actually dealing what not, ironically, we're using that word dealing again when the response in the service I've learned to deal with, which means to me, it's about I've learned to put a lid on it. And as we know, we talked about in the very first podcast we ever did, you know, lifting the lid. Because it's like men are terrified of lifting the lid. Because the other mode that we want to move into with good mental health, which we kind of touched on last week, or we discussed last week, is moving into attempt to learn. What are my feelings actually telling me? Very different. And that's a big gap. And there's a big step change there. But until we're actually able to notice that we really aren't dealing with it, and the symptoms, again, we've talked about before, they're often around to say, actually, we're not dealing with it. But men work really hard to try and cover it until actually it becomes critical.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I was thinking about that in terms of me, and I certainly in the past, more so perhaps than now, but still now as well, I've almost feel like I've been programmed and it's so hardwired. So, you know, when you ask the question why, you could say, you know, James, why don't you talk more about your feelings and thoughts and stuff like that? That would be my answer, a key part of it at least. I feel hardwired. It's like I don't have the circuit. I don't have the tools, you can call it whatever you want, but literally I feel I don't have the ability. It sounds crazy because we're just talking about expressing how you feel in a very simple way, but it just feels so alien. It
really does. And I think you've just said something.
It's hard to articulate. I've tried to, but I can't really explain it fully.
But I think that comes from, go back to the imprint, but I think when you've learned actually that you are not allowed to feel certain feelings or think certain thoughts, you do get hardwired. So what you get into, the mode of protection is about, I had an experience where I felt it was shameful to think or feel a certain thing. So my whole way of dealing with things is to make sure I never feel that again.
Yeah.
Or I do everything. And of course, that is ridiculous. You're fighting a losing battle because what happens? Of course, you're a human being. You are going to feel those things. So, but your wiring is, and particularly for men, there's a whole list of things that, you'll disallow. So it's a misnomer to say, oh, I've learned to deal with it. And it's heartbreaking when you hear that that's a response, because you think actually that you may well be functioning. You may well think you're okay. But I think we all really know deep down when we're not actually okay, but we're fooling ourselves because we're just managing to kind of be successful in our careers.
You're just trying to keep the sort of train on the tracks, aren't you?
Yes.
You're trying to just keep going.
Yes, and just hope if the bigger house or the moving up the property ladder, moving up the career ladder,
or even both. Property. No, you're right. Yeah, you're right.
Like that will solve everything, and I'll feel better.
Or whatever ladder you're on.
And what's interesting in
bigger,
that,
better.
I will come back to some of the others, but I think we're moving into some of the other territories. Well, I just want to bring in. It was interesting that one of the things that they found in this survey with the Pro Group was that financial pressures are one of the things that stress men out the most, give them some of the biggest mental health problems. And yet we're feeding it because if we're not careful, in terms of dealing with those, if you like, things that trouble us, wake us in the night, is to put ourselves in more financial debt or whatever. So, I can
understand that as well, because, earlier I said about men being seen as the fixer, protector, provider, etc., and providing, the pressure to feel like you should be providing. Again, hardwired, to what level and where are you going to take that, but what pressure are you going to put on yourself to feel like you need to provide, as we said about getting on the ladders, because actually there are different levels, but perhaps what you touched on before is about, bigger house, bigger car, you've got to provide, you've got to keep fueling that as well. And that puts a lot of pressure on your shoulders, massively.
And I think it's really important here to say that, to remind, because I'm sure I've said this before, per se, there is nothing wrong in wanting to have a lovely house, a lovely home for your family. That's not what this is about. What this is about is, again, it's about what is actually my intention. Is this a compensation because there's things that I don't have the skills to deal with? So if I can fool myself into feeling that actually, if only I were to have the bigger house, if only that would get rid of that uneasiness. So it's that form of protection that I'm talking about, rather than, because whichever way you think about this, in my mind, it will catch up with you sooner or later.
Exactly.
And the more you put it off, the worse you can get yourself in, positions you get yourself in financially and certainly, obviously, emotionally and mentally. So it's just an interesting one just to put on the table, because that's all we're doing today, is putting these things on the table. We don't have answers. We just want to really focus in on some of the reasons that men give why they don't want to talk. The next one I'm going to move on is slightly different, but obviously these are all related in many ways. I don't wish to be a burden to anyone.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I've heard that come up a lot. And actually, when we were talking about the title, Why Are Men So Reluctant to Talk About Their Mental Health, I was doing a bit of research, watching a few videos. Yeah, I do research, Steve.
Yeah, no.
And you do. You impressed me today, I'll tell you what. Come up with the stats. But I was watching YouTube and looked at a few videos. There was an interesting video from King's College, I think it was. It was 5 guys talking about their mental health. And the point was, and I watched a couple of others, but that came up a lot, and a sense of embarrassment came up a lot. The word embarrassment actually came up a lot, not just in the videos, but in the comments below. But sorry, carry on with what you were saying, Steve. It will trigger a few more thoughts, I'm sure, about the videos I watched, but I'll jump in.
Yeah, I mean, when I read it again, I've scribbled alongside it. That to me just is different words for my needs don't matter. My needs, and again, that comes from very early circuitry. I don't want to burden that. The idea that you might share that you are struggling or that you're not okay is kind of ironic too, when we've just said that we think men want to be listened to, but they just terrified that if they even mention it to someone, they'll be rejected, they will be whatever.
So is that embarrassment? They're embarrassed to say it because of the fallout, because of what they think will be.
Like the burden really bothers me though. Like it's a burden that you really feel. And I think that's the thing. And
That is different, actually.
It's that thing, and you're holding that in, and again, slightly related to that, I was reading, again, men are more likely to speak if a friend, say, has spoken first. So again, it's about permission. You're so terrified that, if you just dare, we talked about this last week in terms of what can we do? Just daring, just to share, not only it could be helpful to you, but could be helpful to your mates, because to be honest, everyone is desperate to be heard by the sound of it, but they're too terrified of being shouted down, or not shouted down, that's not the right expression.
But like you said,
being shamed almost.
Yeah, and actually feeling perhaps that you don't want to bring other people down. Maybe they feel that as well. Maybe some guys feel that, I don't want to be a burden and offload onto you, share all that with you and bring you down as well. You're almost that narrative that I'm going to take you down with me, sort of thing, just because you're sharing what's going on for you, which I don't think is the case at all. And actually, again, coming back to some of the videos I watched, these guys were talking about how much better they felt for talking, and how much better the person who they were talking to felt as well, that they could share it with them, that they actually felt quite not almost privileged, that you feel comfortable sharing something with me and vice versa. That's quite an honor, almost, not a burden.
Yeah. See, isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
No, when you think about, gosh, the different word there, honor versus burden. Yeah, it's the opposite to what we fear so often.
Well, that's how I'd feel. If you sharing what's been going on for you this week, that I feel, I'm glad that you feel you can share that. And yeah, it does feel like an honor that you would choose to share that with me, because you probably wouldn't, I'm sure, share it with any old person right now. You wouldn't feel comfortable necessarily, and that's fine. But that is a completely different perspective, and it changes the dynamic of the whole conversation, I guess, as well.
And I think the more you do it, James, and I think you become more willing to do it. And it's not about kind of every single time you see someone, if you like, spewing out your guts.
No, we said that before. You don't have to put it all on the table.
This is about,
no.
First step is, can you allow it in yourself, just to actually admit to yourself that you're struggling or you've got something that's bothering you? Because that's the first step. Once you can admit it to yourself, and as we said last week, maybe being discerning about who you share it with, but rather than believing that it may be a burden, maybe using the word you've used today, James, which is that person maybe feel it's an honor. I certainly do. I certainly do when people share, because you think, I know you're allowing vulnerability, and that's a big thing with men.
And you know what it takes for them to share something, what is to get to that point.
Yes.
To feel like they can just share something. That's massive step, massive.
It's huge. And it leads on, because then again, and you mentioned this word already just now, but another specific reason was, I'm too embarrassed.
Yeah. I jumped the gun with that, but it was on my brain because of the videos I watched. And it just kept coming up, Steve. They were talking about it in the videos, the guys I watched. And then, interestingly, I do this sometimes, I looked at the comments underneath, because I don't always do that, because it's not great to do that. I must say, on Twitter and other things, you go down a rabbit hole and it's not that useful. But in this particular instance, I was watching videos about mental health. So I figured there's a chance that people who are struggling with their mental health would probably comment, which they did, because it was almost like permission, like we said, because they watched the video and they felt they could write something underneath, and the word embarrassment kept coming up a lot.
Yeah.
And some of these people, I'm just going to be honest, they said, okay, well, yeah, you're telling men to talk about mental health, but then when we do, we just get shot down. So we just, I feel embarrassed to do it. That's what that's what came up more than once.
That's what they said?
Yeah, that's what came up in the comments. So,
shot down by who?
Well, this is the question. That's their perspective. I don't know.
Yeah,
but it doesn't really matter, actually, because what I was thinking is, what does matter is their perspective, because that's what they believe. That's what matters, because that's why they're feeling that way. So whether they are or they aren't, why are they feeling like that? Why are they thinking that they're going to be shot down? And who is doing that? So I don't know the answer to that specifically, because it's their viewpoint. But I think that's really sad that you feel that embarrassed and that someone's going to just, shoot you down and shut you down.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, I think what came up for me there, James, was when I was reading that I'm too embarrassed, but actually what I was thinking about, and I suppose you just shared that, was actually, I think what sometimes we're saying is, I'm too scared.
Yeah.
I'm too frightened to share my vulnerability, because that's what it takes. It is, you are sharing vulnerability when you talk about your mental health. And the way that it's been framed for so long is that if you show your vulnerability as a man, that's a thing that women do and not men. It's a sign of weakness. And reframing that to say, rather than it being a sign, it's a sign of strength and of courage. That is a big change. But that's what I believe, absolutely. And I think people respond massively when someone dares to show their vulnerability, because it's like a permission. And I know I've talked about this. I know I've talked about this in previous podcasts. You know, people do respond to, you will just have to see it on TV. You know, it's people respond to people who show their most human side.
Oh yeah, it's relatable, isn't it? We can all relate to that.
Yes, but we're all crying out, and men are no different.
No, you're right.
They're not any different.
Right, what else you got, Steve?
Oh, this is a good one. There's negative stigma around this type of thing.
Okay. About this type of thing, sharing how you're feeling,
talking about their mental health. That it's, and again, it's what comes up when you hear that, James? What comes up for you? What do you think that means?
That kind of almost encapsulates some of the other stuff. Like there's negative stigma around it. So, what does that mean? That it's a burden. It's wrong to show inverted commas weakness. I don't know. And where is this stigma? Where is it coming from? Well, the stigma is some of the stuff we're talking about. We know that there are these things that people feel, and we don't really know where they've come from fully, or we can probably trace it back. But is this just a narrative in people's head, or is it true? Is there a massive stigma? Because like you just said there, you made a good point. I would say, I might be wrong, and I'm just pulling the stat on my head, but at least 90% of the time, when someone shares how they're feeling, there's a real positive response.
Oh.
If you look at, again, I don't recommend you go down the rabbit hole, but if you look at some comments when someone puts something on social media, shares something about how they're feeling, their thoughts, their struggles, you will always get the odd negative or troll or comment. But I would say 90% are always actually really supportive, which is interesting. We don't always talk about, we say, there's loads of people who are just going to shoot you down, but actually they're in the minority. They are, even these days, when there's still people who will do it, don't get me wrong, but they're in the minority. So I'm not sure if that's actually true or if that's just a narrative that we've come up with.
I think it is a narrative, but it's a belief, I suppose, that people that they've been inherited, that they have chosen to believe as a truth.
And like you said, we said that's all that matters. If you believe it, then that's stopping you. Then that's something that is true in itself, because you've convinced yourself that that's a barrier.
But you see, what's so frustrating is you think, if that's a belief, and then you read the statistics again around the problems with male suicide and the rest of it, it just drives you. There's a gap here, and it's about closing that gap. Is to saying, hold on, let's just think about it more as a whole. Why is it okay to talk about what weight you've lifted at the gym?
Yeah.
For your physical body, but it's not okay to talk about how you're feeling.
You're right. People would say, what I've done, I've gone for a run, I've got this time, or how my body's feeling. Oh, my knees a bit sore today, doesn't feel great. But actually what most blokes, and I think women, this is interesting, I think most blokes wouldn't probably talk about some of the more private parts of their body if they've got an issue with those. A bit like mental health. Do you see what I mean? So men would go, my back's sore today, it's aching. But they wouldn't talk about something else that they feel is a bit more private. So in a way, do you think that men maybe view their mental health in the same way as sort of physical health, but the private parts of their body they don't want to talk about if there's an issue? It's a weird thing. There's sort of some sort of correlation. So do they think mental health is private? Do we think that? Do we think that?
I think the two things it's got in common when you're talking about certain parts of the body, particularly sort of intimate areas, you've got to call it, or private areas, whatever, it's kind of vulnerable. It's a fact, because again, also I think there is a link. And I do think, that's a very interesting one. Yeah, but maybe that's for a whole other podcast about men and their relationship with their bodies and what they will and won't talk about. Definitely, I think that will come up because I think that is a good one to talk about. The next one on this list is, I don't want to admit I need support. I don't want to admit I need support.
Again, it comes back to some of the stuff you said about feeling vulnerable and men feeling like they're being weak. I know that actually it can feel that way, but I see that as sort of being interlinked to that, I don't want to admit I need support because it shows weakness. So that's what it says to me, or it shows vulnerability, or it shows that I can't handle the situation. I'm not dealing with it. I'm not, again, coming back to that fixer, provider, protector, I'm not fulfilling my role or my supposed duty as a man that I feel I should be doing. That's what it tells me.
Yes. Then again, it's that whole kind of that set of beliefs about what a man should be.
So all these are coming back to sort of some picture, some image that we men have in our head of how we should be. When I say picture in the head, what I mean is a picture of what you think being a man is all about.
Yes.
And the qualities of a real man, if you like.
Strong.
Strong, the ability to deal with anything, always have an answer, always be able to deal with whatever comes your way. So this narrative and this image, and then I don't want to admit I need support, that's because it doesn't align with the picture in your head, which is a fallacy, really, anyway.
Well, it's a fantasy, as we know, and this is why we're kind of doing this podcast, because we want to work to kind of help to be part of that reframing, because the statistics around suicide, mentals are shocking, and it's no good. That is such a redundant image. So if you ever thought it was real, think again. It's time for some straight talking, because the statistics are showing that is failing big time for us all men, and the more that we perpetuate it and feed it, the worse we're making it for other men. So we need to kind of, hopefully, you and I kind of doing this podcast because we have found a way of breaking out of it, because we're both products of society, and a lot of what I can read. So again, I'm not going through this as some kind of, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I can so identify. Totally. I'm in and out of some of these, even now, it's, so I completely understand. So it's not a surprise, but it's just really bringing and shining a light on the fact that this whole concept of what it means to be a man needs to be in a wider context. What does it mean to be a human being? Just because you're a man, you're all no different. And actually, redefining what does it mean around being not only a man, but being strong. All these things you identify, but, trying to put a lid on a whole part of your being, which is your emotional and mental health, it's almost ridiculous. So, and
it will come crashing down, and as you can see by you hear by the statistics we're reading out here.
Absolutely. And I mean, one of the last ones on here was I have no one to talk to. That's why they won't talk. And I think that upset me when I read that, because you think, is that the case? Or you believe that, again, it's all related to the ones above, that you feel you can't talk to somebody?
Again, what we're talking about is what you've convinced yourself. All of these are because I'm sure in many circumstances when somebody feels sad, angry, or going through certain struggles, not always at all, but a lot of the time there is someone that would be willing to listen, that I'm sure. Maybe I'm just being maybe I'm hopeful, optimistic. Like we've said, someone would love you to actually share something. I do believe that, honestly.
You can pick up the phone to the Samaritans, or there's other places to go to. What I'm saying is there's always somebody who is willing to listen.
Yeah.
You've just got to make the first step, and that can be so hard,
Yeah, of course.
I think one of the other things. So that's the kind of that's in a nutshell what the survey from Priory Group came up with in terms of the reasons that men don't talk about their mental health. One as a sort of an addendum to that was them just saying that almost a quarter of the respondents said they would not feel comfortable even speaking to a GP or any other professional, though.
Well, I don't think I'd feel comfortable speaking to a GP. I mean, I'm just going to be honest. There may be GPs listening to this, but I'm just being honest. I wouldn't feel comfortable in my experience going to a GP and talking about my mental health, because I feel that, I know, I might be wrong, but all of these are just a perspective. I feel that, not to say they wouldn't care, but I just feel like they're so busy. They've got so much going on. You're on a timer when you walk in there, I know they've got to get through X amount of people per day. And I just feel that my experience of going to GPs, which I don't do often, is that you're going to get a pill for this or sort of a prescription for this. And I don't feel like I go in there and openly chat to someone I don't know and feel like I'm going to get what I need back from it. That's just my perspective. And I can relate to why a quarter of respondents feel that way. I don't know. I could say I'd be more likely to pick up the phone to Samaritans, but I'm not sure. I would.
What about a counsellor, psychotherapist? That's when I see any other professional. I think that's, again, there's a real fear around sharing. And interestingly, just to go back to the point about the GPs, I completely hear what you're saying, but it's interesting knowing a GP, and he spends a lot of his time dealing with mental health issues. And all I would say is that if you feel like you can't speak to anyone else, that may be at least a starting, because you may not have aired it to anyone.
Of course.
That is the thing. So
I
in
think
that sense,
absolutely, if you feel you can do that, that's great.
Or just as a starting point, it's just to talk to somebody, and it's a stepping stone. I know when I've had in the past when, I wouldn't now necessarily, because for the reasons you said, James, and I've learned that. But there was a time when you're really lost and in the dark and you don't know where else to go, then the GP feels like the right place to start. And sometimes medication may be something you need, but it's not necessarily everything. But that's a whole other discussion. I think the thing is, again, it's just that reluctance to reach out to a professional, which I don't think is the case, again, with ladies. Because, again, another stat I came up with, it was around, in the NHS, only 36% of referrals to talking therapies were men.
Right.
So I think there's just reluctance to reach out, because, again, people don't think twice about coming to see a professional personal trainer.
No.
But it's just that thing, particularly when there's this thing about wanting to be heard, and you wonder then, well, why are you, what is it you're afraid of in that sense? Which is fine, but then talk to somebody. Whether it's a friend, and we talked about some of these things last week. It's just that thing of making the first step.
Well, I know you're a big fan of the benefits of counselling or therapy, and I am too. Certainly when my dad passed away, I've spoken about this before, that I had some therapy then, talking therapy, that helped. But I do find that it's difficult for people, because they've got to feel like they have the trust in that person as well. That can take time to develop. So I can understand not necessarily wanting to go into a GP's office who you don't know and just start talking about your mental health. But I hope that others don't necessarily feel the same way as me, but I'm just being honest, that's how I feel. But then I found another way. So it's important to maybe look at who, as you say, there's more than one option. So it maybe you do feel comfortable picking up a phone and speaking to someone, or maybe having some sort of therapy, going straight to there rather than going to your GP. There's so many options. We've spoken about it before, so many ways, and it doesn't even have to be a bigger step as those. They're big steps. I would say they're the biggest steps.
Yes, absolutely. And okay, so I'm just going to pause and say, so I think it's important to say this, as you say, from my perspective. Okay, when I first contacted a psychotherapist, I thought it was something I'd never do, right? I thought I'd never speak to a psychotherapist. And I felt it was a sign of weakness, a sign that I wasn't in control. And again, I felt there was stigma. And I thought that when you go to see that, it's only crazy people went to see a psychatherapist. Seriously, that's what
I thought that once upon a time.
And I thought, certainly no one can tell me anything different, okay? And I also thought that the psychotherapist or counsellor is there to fix me or fix people. It completely is wrong, okay? No one is there. You know, a good psychotherapist, and you're right, you've got to find a good person with good, you have the rapport with, because it's a relationship ultimately. But I'm just going to say this because this is my perspective, and it might just reframe it for whoever's listening to this. A psychotherapist is there to help you, if you like, empty the contents of what's troubling you in your mind. Almost the analogy I have, you kind of just put it on the table, and then with somebody else, you walk around the table, and it's the same stuff that's in your head. That's not going to change. But through the work you do with a counsellor, they help you to look at it in a different way.
And you mentioned this word earlier, reframing, and kind of that certainly in my experience didn't happen at the start. I wasn't ready for that. But over time, that's kind of the direction you can end up going in a little bit, and reframing what's in your head, as you say, rather than someone fixing it or putting stuff there. It's just making sense of it, all the stuff that's flying around.
Yeah, there's nothing to fix.
So there's some big stats and some big stuff that we've spoken about. I mean, is this a pandemic?
Yes.
So it's interesting. We've spoken a lot about the other pandemic in the last 18 months. I mean, sometimes it's all that I hear. But this is a pandemic, but it doesn't seem to get the sort of the daylight. Because
I think we come at the conversation so often, James, from the wrong perspective.
And so when I say, is this pandemic just...
I feel it is.
Mental health across the board, and men in particular, because that's what we're talking about.
Well, I think some of those stats that I gave earlier, the suicide rate suggests that, yes, men are struggling so much. And I do think it's because it's almost like a silent problem, we could say a silent killer because of the suicide statistics. But what I get frustrated about, James, is that the signs are there all over, that men are struggling, in the sense that you see the shocking stuff on the news when something terrible happens, someone's been murdered, or you hear these terrible things, and understandably, we're shocked and we are appalled, and we just want to write off the person that's done it, but you kind of think, well, what has caused that person? Often a man. I mean, the statistics around gun crime in America is predominantly male. So it's kind of, again, it's the symptom, but we don't think of that as a mental health problem.
No.
I think we all have a role to play in taking care of ourselves that then can give more people permission so that we start to sow the seeds of better mental health. And it's not easy, but what choice do we have other than to start and to do what we can for ourselves and for others?
Well, that's why I think it's important that we're talking about and raising some of these issues and the statistics, and making conversation around the reluctancy to talk about mental health. I think that's so important, because by talking about it, we can learn maybe to understand it a little bit more, and hopefully that will again spark a bit more conversation, put some daylight around it, and who knows really where that might lead. But we've definitely, because one of the statistics, actually, I'm just looking at it, that there's a lot there, but one of them that really strikes me is that 77% of men that were polled have suffered with anxiety, stress, and depression. So 77%. I mean, it's
over 3/4.
Yeah. So we can go to the level of feeling suicidal, and the very extreme of that, or we can bring it right back. But something I heard in a video, and it was of a guy actually I was watching, and his son had took his own life, and the dad had said that anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts, etc., they don't happen overnight. And that really, I felt, sort of stuck with me, because it made me think, no, they build and build, and these things simmer, and it happens over time. And that's why a lot of the stuff we're talking about, and the reluctancy and sort of reframing and all these concepts and ideas, are important, because the chance is there at the beginning, and it gets harder and harder, I think, for people. It's certainly, my experience with how I felt in the past, the longer it goes on without intervention, the harder it gets. So, it's just, I'm doing two things. I'm highlighting the point that there's so many different levels to this, and 70% of men suffer in some way, which is huge. And the other point I was making is that intervention and getting help at the earlier stage, or whenever you can, is just so important.
Yeah. And as a step, as we said, we talked about some of this last week, we don't sort of necessarily go over it again, but, just taking a first step, one conversation. And I just wanted to just talk briefly about the fact that I think when I think men struggle as well. It's not in any of this day-to-day, James, but just the language around mental health. I think men find it quite alien. I think they think some of the languages thinks, oh, that just does not speak to me at all. And so it can feel quite daunting to know they think that, they can't find the words that kind of allows them to express what's going on. And I just want to share something that came up the other day because I was quite moved by this. I was talking to a friend who had been on a trip with some mates, some other blokes, and his brother was there. One evening they'd had a few drinks, they were just sitting around, and he's chatting to his brother, and his brother suddenly got his phone out, put YouTube on, and showed him, just put on this video about the black dog, which, for those of you who don't know, is a metaphor for depression. And my friend said to his brother, well, why are you showing me this? And he said, that's how I've been feeling for quite a while. I was really moved by that because that was his way of being able to at least break out and to say, this, I feel comfortable doing this, finding the words that speak to him. And I think that's the other problem we have, is finding the right language around mental health that feels non-threatening to men.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's amazing that he found the courage to do that. Credit to him. And I guess that's one of the reasons why in the last couple of episodes I've said about sharing the link to this podcast as well with someone. Because we can talk about ways that we find it helpful for us to share how we're feeling, or to talk to other people, or share with someone else what's going on for us. But not everyone does, and I don't always. It doesn't. A bit like you said earlier, it was still, when you read out statistics, that you can still relate to some of these now. It's not that you're beyond that; it's happening now, and perhaps sharing the link, our link, just simply clicking the share button, WhatsApping it to a friend or whatever, that you don't know the ripple effect, the benefits of that, or what that might do for that other person. And it could be either way. It could be because someone would benefit from it, or it could, you're struggling and you're sending it to someone as a way of sort of saying, this is going on for me. What these guys are saying, I can relate to that. So it can work both ways, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is so important. Finding ways that feel okay. Because ultimately, just really looking at the question that we asked at the beginning, why are men so reluctant to talk about the mental health? For me, there's one word: it's fear. It's scary. This is scary stuff. When you go through all of that stuff, we're just scared, and we just think if we just keep doing what we're doing, it will go away. And I'm here to tell you it doesn't, from my experience. And rather than it being weak or whatever, to turn towards it, and to actually even to go back to that example, that took a lot of courage for that guy to show that phone to his brother. I was really moved by that, because but it was huge in the sense that finally he was able to reach out in whichever way. But that's why. So yeah, we've got to find ways of normalizing and making it less scary, and saying it's okay. It's okay to share whatever you're going to share. It's fine. You can tell me whatever.
Absolutely. I think I need to lie down after this. This is a good episode. This is good, and Steve, we got through a lot there.
It's quite, Well, I hope it's useful. I hope it's helpful. Like all of our podcast episodes. Well, it was useful for me. I
enjoyed it, and you enjoyed it. I think that's a good starting point.
Yeah, I hope so, because as I say, this is such a big issue. But this is one of many of our podcasts. But I just feel today feels like a useful one of the first 3 episodes, James, to really sort of put down some foundations of what this podcast is all about.
It does indeed, and I think we are ready to wrap things up on that note. I just want to say thanks for all the amazing feedback that we're getting about our podcast. We've been out there for a few weeks now, and it's been great to be back with, all the comments and just everything. The fact that you are sharing with people is great, and the reviews and all of that stuff is fantastic. So thanks so much for that. Keep it coming. We do like a bit of that, don't we, Steve?
We certainly do. Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, the input is fantastic.
And on that note, I'm just going to remind you quickly that we are on Instagram now. I know we're still on it. That's a good sign. After a couple of weeks, we're still on it, Steve. I'm posting a bit on there. I hope you're enjoying some of the photos. That is mindfulmen_talk. And then, of course, we're on Twitter and Facebook, which is just Mindful Men Talk, and our website, mindfulmentalk.com. But I'll put all these in the show notes, so we'll put those there for you, so you can easily just click and follow us or drop us a line anywhere you like on the usual platforms. It's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.